Rick, you can't get military aid, at least emergency military aid, through the House without a House Speaker. So how does this set things up?
We're going to find out, I guess, because a couple of things can happen here. First, so there is going to be another effort to elect a House Speaker probably this week. That doesn't mean there will be a House Speaker. There really is no front runner yet. There are two guys, Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, who both have some support, but neither has majority support. So one might have to throw in with the other in order to get enough Republicans to vote. Who knows? I don't think anybody has a clue whether that's going to happen or not. If they cannot elect a House Speaker, then the question becomes, is there some other way you can get important legislation through the House, either through the interim Speaker, who is Patrick McHenry? It seems unclear whether you could actually do that. And then there are these sort of backroom maneuvers, arcane tactics, such as one thing called a discharge petition, whether you can actually somehow use a coalition of most Democrats and some Republicans to get through this type of legislation. Let's just keep in mind here, we're talking about this basket of possible projects, more aid for Israel, more aid for Ukraine. There is bipartisan support in both chambers of Congress for both of those things. The problem is that the way this has worked out in the House for the time being is you've got this small minority of extreme Republicans who are basically blocking the House from doing anything by firing the Speaker last week and then so far not being able to elect a new one. So if you just held an up or down vote on those two things, they would pass. The problem is the procedural difficulty that there's no Speaker in the House. So we'll see what happens in coming days, sometime soon, I think.
Rick, thinking back to just a few weeks ago when there was still a House Speaker in place, we had that
Those were the days.
stopgap funding measure that averted a government shutdown, but did not include aid for Ukraine. Now we're talking about a new conflict between Israel and Hamas. I mean, you point to the procedural challenges. How realistic is it to get military aid for both Israel and Ukraine across the line once a House Speaker is in place?
Well, I think it's important to point out that most people familiar with Israel's military planning say they're not in urgent need of U.S. aid right now. They have plenty of weaponry, they have plenty of ammunition, but this is looking like it could be a pretty drawn out war between Israel and Hamas, and they are going to need more within, let's say, a few months. About the same with Ukraine. Ukraine has about as much as it's going to get for the time being, but it is also going to need more within the next few months. So that actually coincides with the expiration of those temporary funding bills, which only last until November 17. So November 17 is a super important crunch point at this point. I think that is a point at which, number one, we have to have proper funding for the government if we're not going to have a shutdown. I think you can also think of that as a workable deadline for these other two things. And there's going to be a third thing thrown in here, probably, which is what Republicans want as a concession, is some kind of further action, which could include further funding to deal with the migration problem on the southwest border. So you could have a kind of like a mega national security bill that includes Israel, Ukraine, and something for the southwest border, which Biden might actually be happy to have, even if he says he doesn't want it because it's a big problem for him. So lots to pay attention to. And again, nobody really knows how this is going to get done, but it is going to become imperative for Congress to do it.
Yeah, step one, get a House Speaker in place. Rick, it's going to be a busy few weeks for you. Appreciate you staying on top of it.
See you, Kiko.